So let's continue with the fusion half of the fission fusion dichotomy. And I know that you mentioned the magnetic confinement, and one of the things that you're working on is the isolated generation of the superheated plasmas that we've been discussing that reach temperatures hotter than the sun. And this naturally raises about 100 questions, and you've answered at least 19 of them, maybe. But let's start with how you isolate plasma in this way. My understanding is that it's with a toroidal assembly called a tokamak. And maybe we should talk about what a tokamak is and then how it is heated to such literally astronomical temperatures, which I can imagine is a huge engineering feat to be done terrestrially without the huge mass and the consequent gravitational confinement of a star like the sun.
Okay, well, the name tokamak is based on actually a Russian acronym, which just means toroidal magnetic chamber. So just to warm up into this, if you think about the interaction between charged particles and a magnetic field, if there's a magnetic field line, then the magnetic force on a particle acts in such a way that the particle gyrates around the field line. It can also move along the field line. So as it's gyrating around the field line, it can form what is ultimately a helix and move relatively freely along the magnetic field, but it can't move nearly so fast across the magnetic field. So the general idea of magnetic confinement is that we're going to use a strong magnetic field which causes the particles to be basically adhere to or be confined locally to a magnetic field line. And then if we make the magnetic field lines go around in a big circle and come back and bite themselves in the tail, then a particle that moves freely along it isn't lost, it just keeps going around on that field line. And so in order to make that geometric configuration, you need basically field lines that have a toroidal configuration. That is, they have a long path along which they can go and come back and be in the same place. Now, that's an oversimplified view. Actually, it turns out you don't exactly just want circular field lines. It turns out you need to have field lines that themselves are slightly helical, going round in the toroidal direction. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And a tokamak is a description of the simplest configuration that we know that does that, which is to have a toroidal field, which we generate by simply taking a solenoid with currents flowing in a winding, bending it round into a torus. So the fields go all the way around the torus, and then having created the toroidal field, we need a poloidal field to make the field lines also be helical. And we get that by passing a current through the plasma itself, because plasma carries current. And that is, at its fundamental level, a tokamak. There are actually other toroidal confinement devices, that is, donut-shaped devices with a hole down the middle, that cause the field lines to go helically by external windings. The windings are then much more complicated, but they are called stellarators. And in fact, some of the more recent work in stellarators has shown that actually, if we're very, very careful about how we design a stellarator, it can work almost as well and maybe as well as a tokamak. And so that's another magnetic confinement device that we're currently very interested in. So that's how we create, if you like, the magnetic bottle. How do we heat the magnetic bottle? Well, in the case of a tokamak, we've got current flowing through the plasma anyway, so a current flowing through a resistor generates a lot of heat, and actually that heat is enough to heat the plasma up to, probably maybe 10 million degrees Kelvin or something like that. It's not quite hot enough to get to the temperatures we need to, so we typically, at least I think it's fairly widely agreed, that we need some extra heating, and the way we do that is using radio waves, and that's in a poor analogy, it's like a microwave oven. I mean, where you can heat something up in your microwave oven, basically by microwaves and having them absorbed in the solid material of your food. Well, we can heat plasmas by applying high power radio waves to them and having them absorbed by the plasma. And that works very well. And there are other ways of heating a plasma.
So is it an engineering consideration? How is it that the tokamak is constructed? Like literally, what are the materials that enable it to withstand temperatures as hot as 10 million degrees, like what you might find in the belly of a star?
The materials out of which the tokamak is constructed don't have to withstand tens or hundreds of millions of degrees. They have to exist separate from the plasma itself. So the plasma itself has to be combined just by the magnetic fields. And so it has to live inside of this toroidal chamber. The way we generate the fields in that is by currents flowing in either copper, magnets, or normal conducting magnets. But in the longer term, and in some existing devices, superconducting coils, where the current flows without any dissipation. But this is one of the challenges of this question about how do the material surfaces withstand, the presence nearby them of 10 or 100 million degrees Kelvin. The answer is it's difficult because there's a little bit of energy that's leaking out all the time. Some of it's radiated, and some of it comes out in the form of particles. So what we need to do is to have sufficiently well-confined plasma that the heat stays in and very little of it leaks out and then interacts with whatever material surfaces are around the edge of the plasma itself. And that's one of the big challenges of fusion energy.